So I just want to sort of start off by just my own reflections. And one is to say, out of the wonderful things that we've done, I think there's so many things we didn't represent that we have to think about representing. And one of them is really the Sephardic voice. And I think that the more that we continue to think about American Judaism as being Eastern European or European based, I think those are traps that we've really got to get out of. I mean, obviously, a lot of the work that we do is really rooted in that. But I think we have to think further about, how to represent, the greater diversity of the Jewish community. I think that the interconnections that have been made about taking this topic, but yet showing all the other arenas that it's a part of. You can take one part out, right? But it's a little artificial. You got to look at how it all fits together. Mike, I think that your keynote really opened the door for us to really think about, how we define things, how we look at things. And it's almost like the more we think of it, the more that, it's not really a question of like the Jewish music or the Jewish music question itself, doesn't get us very far. And I think that, looking at the many things it's really connected to is really important. So I just want to thank you all for just the stimulating ideas and thoughts. I thought we've had really rich conversations. I really like this format. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We had a lot of conversations about, the 20-minute conference paper that, everyone rushes to do and has just 2 minutes for questions. We kind of wanted to change that up a little bit. We can think about other formats. So I'd love to think about all this together. And now I'll pass it to Ray.
Oh, I'm still pass it to you.
Hot potato.
Excuse me, pass it.
That was a mic to mic. I'm happy to offer a few thoughts. What I think is interesting is that one of the most significant concepts that has come out of all these very different presentations, and I love the diversity. I mean, there's more diversity to be had, but I think just the different angles everybody has brought to it. One theme that has come up in so many different ways is the fact that absences matter. Absences are significant, and we've pointed to so many different kinds of absences. And actually, I prepared some thoughts, and I can show you the date stamp on my computer to prove that I did this before we had these conversations. I was going to sort of offer some remarks that I was going to title on elephants and skeletons, or the challenges of understanding both history and the present. And I thought of elephants in the meaning elephants in the room. The things that aren't being said. I thought there were two kinds of elephants that we could have. We could have the elephants, the things that aren't said because there's no need to say them because we all understand them, or there's some sense that it goes without saying, even though we sometimes say it goes without saying that, which sort of defeats the whole purpose. But anyway, the things that go without saying because everyone knows them, and there's the things that the elephants that aren't the elephant in the room, that is things that people are afraid of saying, or that are awkward or problematic, that make people not say them because they're somehow upsetting or difficult. And we've seen some of those referenced as well. And then the skeletons, I thought of the skeletons in the closet, the things that we, in hindsight, know when we're studying history. So we know the skeletons in the closet. We can look back at the past and know that there was something else going on that helps us understand what happens, but we don't know necessarily about the elephants in the room at the time, because if it's not said, we have to infer it. And of course, there's an infinite universe of things that aren't said. So we have to kind of take our best guess and thinking about what is it that's a common understanding. Sometimes we fall back on the idea of a zeitgeist, or just common understandings that we kind of can understand maybe from deep study of the history. And so we can hopefully get at a better understanding of the past through that kind of scholarly research. In the present, we have the advantage of knowing the elephants in the room. We know what our common understandings are well enough, but we may not know about skeletons in the closet because they may not be known. So I think those are two interesting aspects where we have advantages and disadvantages of understanding any given cultural moment. My other thought, thank you, and then I'll pass it to Mike. I thought that there is a really interesting theme also running through these conversations that we've been having. And that is the idea of trying to define Jewishness. I asked Mike the difficult question the first day, why are we doing this at all? Why this concern over nessness, this idea of understanding essence, which seems to be something that a lot of observers have been exploring. And I promise it'll all come together in a second, bring these different strands. One thing that struck me when I was listening to all these presentations was the specificity of any given context, and the ability to be an insider is a moving target. The definition of insider is constantly changing because the group is constantly changing. And so I'm able to laugh at certain things, recognize certain things as familiar because I happen to be an insider in some aspect of what's being presented, but other things go right over my head because I'm not an insider and I don't recognize it. And so the ability to understand something as Jewishness is entirely contingent on your status as insider in any given context. And the final thing that I wanted to observe, that I thought that there's also some kind of irony in this idea that there is some kind of universal essence that we can tap into, that we're trying to define, and that itself is so context specific. This comes from, I mean, there are scholars who are better equipped to answer this question, but it feels like a very 19th century Herderian, Germanic-based idea of finding some kind of or something that we feel compelled to look at, and that is not something we've seen across history, across time. That's something that evolved in the 19th century that I think continues to inform our search today. So that's what I have to say.
Good. Thank you very much. I guess I want to begin by just citing the extremely high level of all the papers I heard, and to apologize for the ones I missed. I think anyone who knows me knows that under normal circumstances, if I had a normal job, I wouldn't have missed any paper at all. But I look forward to seeing the visual images of the papers I missed. And again, I thought the levels were extremely high. This is my third conference already at UCLA. And it's getting better because the first one was trauma. The second one was sound and hate. And this is Jewishness, so I hope the next one will be shtick or something like Mickey Katz conference. I guess what I'm thinking about, I think to myself, I'm a nice guy. People who know me, they think of me as a positive person. So why am I such a schmuck when it comes to like what we know and what we don't know? And why do I keep at it and thinking that whenever somebody says, here is Czechness, I say, well, what do you mean? How do we know that? What do we know? What do we have to know in order to know it? How long would it take to learn what we have to know in order to know it? So I think of it as a kind of, a Columbo move, who's, I guess, even though there's an Italian name, Peter Falk is not Italian, and just there's always one last question when everybody's happy and it's all settled and you're ready to go home. What's the pressing question? And I thought it was a beautiful idea that the idea of Jewishness just keeps asking that question over and over again. What is it? And even raising the Sephardim, how much of a possible concept of Jewishness is based on Ashkenaz and ignores that? And then how do we square all these things? And if everything we want to consider Jewish is so different, how do we make the set? And then it becomes an imaginary set. And then, as I tried to suggest, then we have to ask, why are we trying to make this imaginary set when all the components don't fit together at all? And again, when I thought about Czech music like this, I thought, okay, Dvorak, that's Czech. Ugandan music, that's not Czech. But then, Czech songs that also have German lyrics and Mahler. So then you always inevitably get that set with fuzzy edges. And then you have to ask yourself, as a personal religious thought problem, do you believe a set with fuzzy edges can survive as a set, or do the fuzzy edges eat their way towards the middle like Pac-Man, and that there is no set in the end? So you keep inventing it, destroying it, inventing it, and destroying it, and one hopes that the effort to do these things is thoughtful and interesting and engages people. not nihilistic to dismiss it, but to really ask ourselves, what do we know? How do we know it? If we think we know it, how do we demonstrate it? And then how do we demonstrate it to people who disagree with us? Thanks.
So I guess it's my turn. So I'm teaching a course right now on nationalism in music, and I think my undergraduates are all really terrific. They're very, very smart. We're a little surprised at what I started with, which is, of course, nationalism and the evils that it has accomplished in the world. We recovered the idealist part of it, but there's always that double. And one of the things that I am really interested in from this is the doubleness of just about everything we look at, because it's this, but on the other hand, it's that. And almost everything has that kind of doubleness. And sometimes it's to our advantage that we can slide off meetings with these nestnesses, that we don't pin things down, we don't identify the elephant, because maybe if we don't, we can change its shape before we identify it. Maybe we can have a conversation that changes what that elephant actually is if we don't first pin it down to precise meanings. But on the other hand, it's really important to call out those things, to understand that behind every idealist, there is the possibility of great harm to others. And behind that, there is something else. So I mean, it's for me, part of this whole thing is to do that. That's why in my brief comments and musicals, I talked about, well, Andrea Most, who's done so much for us, is basically repeating the arguments of Richard Wagner about what this danger of being a good mimic means, that you can become a facsimile of something, and then because you're not the real thing, undermine what that real thing is. So that's a belief system. We come down to the belief that Mike talked about in his first in his opening comment to us. And the belief system, I think, is problematic if you don't call it out. For me, that's the biggest elephant in the room. And I'm just so grateful to Mike for starting us by pointing out that what we're talking about isn't something that is actually real. We believe in that there's something there, but we don't know what it is, or we can't pin it down, or it keeps changing its shape, or it's pretending to be something else. There's so many different ways that the sonic representation of Jewishness is sliding out of sight all the time. And some of that's deliberate and because of history, and some of it is strategic. Some of it is having to do with, the fact that really everything becomes everything else. That's what music is for. I love the example you gave with the South African anthem, and the ways in which it takes somebody who understands that. It takes somebody Jewish to understand that this can become that. That you can move between these things that actually don't combine easily. Simple modulation and you're there, but it's how you modulate that makes the difference. So anyway, I that's rambling, but that's how as coherent as I can be after the real wealth of difference that we've heard in the last couple of days. It's all excellent. It's all pointing in all of these different directions. So thank you for that, for being so deft in the way that you've been able to point out something that we may not have noticed, that it's maybe there in front of us that we haven't seen or heard. And so thank you all. And I'm asked back to Mark.
So, yeah, before we do that, I mean, one of the reflections I had on what Ray was just saying is that I think that what Jessica brought to us, where's Jessica, about the bricolage Jewishness is sort of I don't know, it's a solution, so to speak. Not focusing on it being one meaning and one thing. Of course, that changes contextually and generationally and so forth. But I mean, this idea, this Jewishness is about existing between things, really has a lot of potential for us to think about musically. So,
Yeah, just quickly though,
yeah.
the problem is that there are a lot of things that exist between things which are not Jewish, right? I remember one paper Charlie Capwell gave on the Bengali Renaissance with an Indian-style setting of God Save the Queen. And, the discussion was, yes, only somebody who was a marginal man, a marginal person could do that. So, again, I think obviously there were many reasons why Jews found themselves in the margins, and a splitter view would look at them in an isolated way, but they also can be seen in the range of all those different kinds of people who found themselves on the margins, who have something that they share deeply. So, again, we keep going back and forth often. Can I just say quickly, though, I wanted to mention, just for me, one of the really interesting things, which was done in a very casual way, was when Deanna was talking about, in response to something I asked, that the difference between empire and nation, and the kinds of national, when there's national color on the one hand as part of the empire versus nationalism, which is closer to the kind of thing Ray was, not that empires are absolved of doing bad things, but that the kind of nationalism that you're talking about, the soft underbelly of nationalism with its, supposed ideas of either being victimized, but also, again, just very quickly, I got to Czechoslovakia in 1978, and I was just so charmed by how Czech it all was. And I refused to speak German, even my little Russian, I wouldn't speak Russian because it was also Czech. And, I was extremely naive. I realized, of course it's Czech. They've ethnically cleansed the Jews. They throw out the Germans. The gypsies have been sent here and there. Yeah, of course it's Czech. But, so your first impression can be the beauty of Czechness. And then later on, you take a more nuanced view. Elephants in rooms.
Yeah.
So this is just to get the conversation started. So we really invite any and all comments and thoughts. So please.
I just have one more quick absence to point out. Maybe this will give people a second. When we were originally thinking about the conference and thinking about how to frame it and how to create the call for papers, I was just searching around and I came upon a USC Annenberg School report called Jews on Screen, Visibility and Representation of Jewish Identity in Contemporary Scripted TV. And I thought, oh, this is great. Let's see, what have they cataloged? What have they found? And it was this very thorough report. It's really interesting. They did a really interesting kind of content analysis, and they quantified certain kinds of, categorized Jewishness in all kinds of interesting ways. And I'm reading through this thing, and I'm looking at all these different photos and tables and charts. And I finished it, and I just stopped and I said, there is nothing about sound in here. Nothing about music. Nothing. The closest thing was characters having, I think, like Yiddish inflection maybe, but even that was just, it was a really small passing point. And I thought that was so interesting in light of the fact that we were thinking about, the sound of Jewishness, and I think historically, at least, over the last several centuries, Jews have had such a rich musical tradition, and music is, inscribed in so many ways in Jewish life, broadly conceived. And the fact that this report about screen culture that always involves, not always, well, it involves sound always, but it often involves music, there was nothing about the sound of music. So I don't know if that's any food for thought. So that's just another absence that I thought was interesting.
We welcome your thoughts.
I'm a comedy. I've mentioned room because I don't have a job that anybody can take away from me. What you said about including the they would be hitting upcoming conferences would be, it's great if it's not on this particular topic. So for several years, and probably it's still ongoing, is it the Leaf Center that was doing this, the Sephardic?
Right, the UC Ladino.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So they were really good at the beginning, and then they kind of sloughed off, but it was not as good. But in this particular period, and the subject matter that you're talking about, there's no way to include people in something that they were not part of. So our guess is that heavily focused on Ashkenazi. If you can show that in the period that you're talking about, the Safavidim were influential in screenwriting, in songwriting, in film writing, in orchestras. Here at that time period, absolutely they should 100% be included. If they are not into this peer review and subject matter that you decided to focus on, there's no reason to include people in what they shouldn't be including. So let's say moving forward from 1980 onwards, should we be including in the Los Angeles scene Iranian Jews? Totally, because from 1980 onwards, they're here and they begin to be part of our working environment and contribution to academia and everything. But if there's something that's about Jews in the 1940s and 50s, there's really no reason to encourage Jews. And I'll just say,
No one would ever take away your job under any circumstances. But I guess I would just say this, that they used to say, right, that there were just no women composers, and there really weren't any African American or composers of color. And then people started looking around and they found, whoops, look what we missed. So I guess the question, I don't know personally a lot about Sephardic filmmakers and film music, but I would imagine that if one investigated it, if one had a stake in it, then one would turn up such things, and then
if they get turned up, they should be able to.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a Sephardic Film Festival that's been held here in LA for like the last 25 years. Netflix has had shows about Jews who live in Turkey and really trying to represent what was life like for Jews in the Ottoman era. I mean, it's out there and exists. The issue is we need people to study them, and we need.
But yes, that should be studied.
Right.
And in the Ottoman era, and in Istanbul, and in Thessaloniki, and the conference that was held here, for 7 years running, I did talk about those things, and it talked about it well too. Did a good job.
Yeah, but to echo Mike's point, we don't simply want to echo what everybody already knows. We want to find out what we're missing. And if we don't look, we won't. So I think I mean, we may find that there isn't, but that's never been the case. Every time we look, we find out that we've missed something. We just haven't looked there before. That's how they discovered Pluto. They figured out there was something there, and they looked, and sure enough, it was there, right? And it turned out to be a dog, according to Disney. So anyway, I mean, the point is that when you're thinking about what you want to do next, you don't simply try to reinforce what you already know. You try to figure out what you've missed. And I think that's the danger of saying, well, they weren't important, so we don't need to think about them.
They are important when they appear
Okay,
in Los Angeles. They become important.
But yeah, can we hear from someone who is actually a part of the conference? I think I'd just love to hear more now that you've heard everyone else who had, let's hear from you. Right.
I'll just say I enjoyed it so thoroughly. It's very different from your conference. So you keep like your why not? So, yeah, of course. It's really loud. No, I'm normally a denizen of music theory conferences, of musical theater conferences, and this is the first conference that I've been to really on Jewishness, and it's part of my own experience, and it's nothing that I've ever been in a crowd of people who talked about it in this way, and I just found it so enriching, and also really it felt like really as a wonderful community of people who have the Jewish experience from very, very different parts of the world and of North America, and so yeah, I just wanted to say thank you and how really enriching it was. I don't think I have any questions other than a questionable form.
He's a plant. He just. Thank you, Michael.
Look at. I know you. Yeah.
Yeah, so this conference was incredible, and I'm coming away with so much to read, so much to think about, so many new people to speak with about these things. So thank you all. I think one thing for just moving into the future is that I understand why Sonic was up front here, because we were looking at all of the ways that shows up. If we would have gone a little bit more into like musical representations, then I might have liked to see, or would like to maybe see in the future, some more attention to gesture, because I feel in every in almost every paper there was reference to gesture, dance, movement, things like that, all super interesting and all very related to sound. And so I'm seeing a lot of nods which says yes, maybe the next conference is something music, gesture, dance, movement, etc. In Jewishness, on screen and off. Yeah.
I just have a question for everybody. Do you have any ideas? I have one hypothesis, but I'm curious to see what other people think as to why music was not one of the categories in this report that I mentioned about Jews on screen. Why?
People don't know how to talk about it.
Was that?
People don't know how to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Meaning?
Except theorists always know.
We don't know how to talk about it, but we do it with more inflection. I have a question. So if you believe, like Sarusi believes, that the Sephardic song Adio Corrida was taken from Verdi, does that make it more Jewish or less Jewish? Or does it not matter? Right? Because everybody thought it was a Sephardic tune or something, and he said, no, it's taken from Verdi. So is that, does it matter? I mean, again, these are maybe just simply annoying thought problems.
Where there's an actual spiritual.
Right.
Is that bad?
But I know when I first heard that song, it really meant a lot to me to believe that it was somehow, not that when I first heard Victoria de Los Angeles sing those Sephardic songs, but it meant a lot to me to believe that was a real, the liner notes didn't say originally Verdi, and it meant a lot to me in constructing, whatever fantasy I had about them. And then as I read on over the years, that almost all the tunes were taken, and the whole performance style was also made up, and sort of, or a fantasy of sorts.
One of the things that I feel that I learned working with the Sephardic Jews, and I don't mean to sound like a rabbi when I say the following, is that we in Western sort of academic thinking take ownership to be such a very important value, where in Middle Eastern music, that's really not the case. A very famous Sephardic rabbi, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, wrote many rabbinic tshuvot, rabbinic discourses. And he was asked the question, can religious communities take the term is shirei agavim, which basically means, secular love songs, and can they put them into tefillah, can they put them in prayer? And he goes on to say in this very long discourse, I'll try and make it short, that when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed and they came and they saw broken vessels, they couldn't use those vessels because the vessels were imbued with, the term is makabel tuma, they were imbued with spiritual impurity. But he said when it comes to music, music is not a physical entity. And he says music is lo lahishtamesh ba. It's recreated every time that it's done. So for Sephardim, when you say that the melody comes here or comes from there, it's a non-issue. It's what it means to them. It's the meaning that they've derived from it, from could be when they first heard it, or however that's related, to family history. So I mean, there are just many different answers.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Look. Well, okay, the most common email I get from students and former students is, "Can you write me a letter?" But the next one after that is, "Someone plagiarized my work." I constantly get it from students. Obviously there is this consciousness, right, that originality belongs to me. Right. How dare you? Right. And even though some of us may genially consider our work collective, obviously the way the whole system works is reinforcing that. But I agree with you.
Yeah, that's a very important issue. I hate to call out Holly, but Holly was so involved with a lot of the discussions here. Is there anything you'd like to share?
My brain will probably just finished teaching. I think for me, it's the question of what's next is, I think, one of the biggest ones kind of looming in my brain right now. With as Rick said, like keynote setting everything up so wonderfully for us to be able to continue pursuing, essentially, answer the question that the joy it will answer the question is perhaps something we could take it to whatever comes next with this topic. And I don't know, I find myself maybe with a question for everybody here, to what degree do we want to stay involved with this conversation to continue it? Especially when Daniela was just telling us about running into other archives online, they're mentioning sound music, and
let's make our own report.
Yeah, we are able to, or at least at the very least willing to tackle this confidently and deliver.
Yeah, that's great.
It's also, we're lamed by, even though things are possible online, I'm sure everyone here has noted to their hopeful chagrin that, neither sounds nor moving images fit between hard covers. And so much of the prestige in our fields are still related to print journalism, print articles, and online things less so. So, even our ability to depict what we're talking about really depends on either, sort of clunky, having a text with a reference to an online website. Maybe we'll get to the point where there's such a quick ability to show a QR code and immediately, hear something. But I think that also makes it difficult to present our work in a way that not only, I think, those of us who are maybe conversant with certain traditions of musical discussion might not need as much, but to present it to a broader public without moving images and without sounds seems almost pointless. And the only way to do that now is online. And that's, I think, a problem.
Yeah. That's really true.
I just wanted to offer something that if you want somebody's name, sure, I'll take it. For having definitions of identity and stuff, let him play up. He's very huge. And this is.
But is he dead?
Yeah, he's very good. And this is what his hands. It's very. And every once in a while, people rediscover it and say, "Oh, things have essences. It's not ontologically touched." And the way to get out of it is to recognize that the ontological question are themselves is true. What do we gain by making this definition? What do we gain by putting some things in this box, in that box? What do we learn from doing those things? Because the half thinking that the box do.
Very profound thought. Thank you for sharing.
No, this is a obvious. I'm very angry about that.
Now, can I speak loud enough? I want to come back to the discussion on the Jewish staff. Because so what you've been discussing is that essence as the cultural factor, and that of course is very much connected to the question of essence. So we come back to so many issues and we study foreign factors. So I mean, as you all know, I've been starting from the science which is foreign factor to last songs of the period. Going so I come from many systems of music, right? I like film masters in training, both in music and in digital studies. So for me, forever so many questions muse in essence. So we have, this long-standing tradition of cultural factor in the Jewish world. And it gets discussed, in the Jewish world, but it's interesting it gets more discussed in the Christian and surrounding culture to other cultures. So I think, if you're asking these questions about essence and so on, I would suggest moving forward, we could actually record funding on human capital. Because that is something we can all contribute to. And we'll see that in so many, cultures and contexts, how this question is answered, because it really taps right into the question of the essence. And what is allowed, what is not allowed. And it's interesting, Mark, you were calling fashion ladies authority on that for practice that was in place for, 3,000 years in the Jewish community making war. And just to finish with a really funny example is around 1600 when Levy was introduced to the services, and was sent to a really famous German Jew. And the Jewish community of Rotenburg had such a discussion about it that they had such an argument that they smashed the entire theory of Islam about the question of can we use this melody. But at the same time, what the Christian authorities, forbidding certain melodies to be used in the English world. So, I just wanted to hand that over to you.
Thank you.
There's no question that's really in the context discriminating so many different ideas from all different topics. It's really very exciting. And one of the things that you're walking into hopefully is to actually get a trying to be into that. And you create such an amazing point right now that to do that setting would be such an absence. And I think about going told it this way, talking about sitting up, I'm sure we actually put on that. Yeah. It's how sound brings us to a place that's so fun. I just really applaud the notion of having this conference today in this moment in time with Jewish representation worldwide being such happening. And Raymond, look at whoever created your logo for this particular conference with a moment that we inside an old stone grill. And I think about protests that are happening around the world today. And how the things that are waiting at peers are not Jewish representation. They are things like Jews will not place us or some religion. And so what is it about our voice that we are not allowed to come out that represents the Jewishness in a way that can bring out globally the way that the hate is bringing out. And I think also the indigenous messaging on why we sound that I assume that you went down a little like rabbit on the question was that they were asking to do the paper. But I think that we so often sound we find it in some camp when it shouldn't be. And so we think it's just a visual and moving image where I think we all know that sound right away brings really whatever it's nailed in chalkboard or we'll wash them apart. It brings us to a place so quickly, unlike anything else.
Yeah, and actually I was thinking about this also when at Mark's recommendation I watched Nobody Wants This. I hadn't heard about it. I was like, well, all right, I guess I should check it out for academic purposes. And I thought that was an interesting test case for this question because the premise is, a rabbi, it's set in LA, so a rabbi starts a relationship with a non-Jewish woman. And so, it's about they're kind of negotiating his Jewish identity, her non-Jewish and sort of very sort of complicated identity without any obvious spiritual or religious connection. And so I was curious how the show was going to portray Jewishness for the viewer as presumably a stand-in for the non-Jewish character, as she's trying to understand what it means for him to be Jewish and what it would mean for her to become Jewish in order to be with him. And I found that I didn't do any kind of systematic analysis of it, but what struck me was that the Jewishness that was portrayed was much more focused on visual cues. So, Star of David, like a head covering, the kippah, yarmulke, and specifically the Shabbat candles, lighting the candles on Friday night, and eating challah, like the braided egg bread. But they lit the candles, but there was no. I don't even believe they sang a melody. It was all visual, which I found interesting because I was expecting, what melody are they going to sing? When I moved to LA, I discovered people were singing a different kind of, Friday evening melody from what I'd known growing up. So I was wondering what they were going to do, and there was none, or if there was, it wasn't in any way, significantly melodic. So that's just by way of observing that I guess maybe they felt the show's creators felt a stronger, more immediate way was to use those more widely understood symbols and visuals of Judaism rather than trying to use sound as a shortcut.
Is this okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for all of that. It's been really valuable and great to connect with everybody here and to look forward to more conversations. I'm thinking a lot about the question to know about why sound does get clueless. And I've been thinking about this for decades. I find people are afraid to talk about how Jews sound. Even working in a synagogue, all our 450 member families are afraid to talk about how what synagogue sounds like. I think part of it from the Jewish side might come from this sort of Jewish skills perspective of I don't want to sound like I think and find that this a very valuable culture. And from the non-Jewish perspective, I think it's not wanting to sound like they sound like. Whereas I feel like what we've sort of discovered in this time, especially with kind of the talks focusing on the more comedic things, like Shaky Caps, for example, is that we have to talk about it. We have to talk about how it sounds. And I can understand that. I can understand some people in walking on eggshells around what they might consider to be stereotypes, but I don't know. I think it's valuable to talk about good things, even if they cheer on it.
Oh, so
Just start right back.
And I'll be brief. I feel like this is where I have to jump in just to share that my podcast called the Family Jewish Podcast. It's fourth season. The impetus for starting the podcast was the fact that I wasn't seeing scholars who work on Jewish music studies or Jewish sound or media being invited to participate on other academic podcasts. And so signed up to start with my own, and that's all it was going to be about. So I may be putting up some of you for interviews for the coming academic year. I'm marking on this past season, and I try to spread out which institutions and countries and all sorts things, developments I feature on each season, but I may reach out to you. And also on that note, as we're thinking about places for publication and cementing our scholarship and finding homes for it, I'm an associate editor of the journal Daniela. We are always recruiting new essays, especially from women and underrepresented minorities. We see a lot of men who set that stuff and love to diversify that. So if you are working on something and you're thinking of a home for your scholarship, please keep me the Judaic fact find. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Lynn.
Okay, so sort of follow up on topics. My thoughts are more with that. Thinking first about Michael's keynote and the various notions of sounds Jewish, and also what Jewish music is. It's just music created by Jews. So it's we spoke much Jewish is flower crop sod. That Brock's line that a lot of us, it's not very self-serving cycle. I'm talking about code shifting, right? Like the ways in which we choose to sound Jewish or not, and that the deliberateness of sounding Jewish or not sounding Jewish in code shifting is something that could easily be a topic here. That's great.
That was way beyond Jewishness. That's
Yeah, no, that's good. I just want to make one small point. The logo that we have there, it's a really, really interesting issue for us where we, we're a secular institution. We're not a religious institution. We want to convey the Jewishness or something about it being Jewish, but we can't make it too Jewish. And it's really...
This is the kind of conversations we have.
I kid you not. And we all weighed in on it. And whose idea was it your idea to have the 6? Or was it Holly's idea? Yeah. I mean, it came up through the brainstorming. was just very subtly, for the center of the fuel wheel, make that into a Jewish. The Star David?
Rocket, yeah.
No, but we were playing around with the Kligman and supposed. I mean, I just put it in the middle where you don't focus. Yeah.
Very simple.
Yeah.
Like a slightly dull-witted dog with a bone. I wanted to just take up briefly Elizabeth's issue about essence, and I just sort of wonder, this is flaky, but I mean, I think I have a Mike-ness, and I think you have an Elizabeth-ness. So, is it possible that this idea of essences really comes from our own self, and therefore projected, well, if I have a Mike-ness, then maybe Czech has a Czech-ness, and it may start with that, but you're a medievalist, so you would have an idea of whether this is a very current idea that we have an essence that's ourselves, and whether that would have been anathema to people 1,000 years ago.
Sure, I do this. I'll do all that. Yeah, you can fight up.
Right.
More elephants.
It does make sense. It does make sense because of our experience. Or we filter everything that by,
But that's how so many of our, how much of our art does that for us. I mean, we want consistency of character, right? Well, we won't believe the story. That character just changed. It changed the essence. That same thing about that character. That we really care about how all of that works. Everything has to be somehow at least internally consistent. So that's how our art works. And to me, this is maybe the biggest spot. We want to make our real art. And that's something you can do and never should try to be. It's a medical, it's a vision of other people. They have to do the student.
Well, I think that ending a conference with questions is a truly Jewish thing. It's an academic thing too. It's a Jewish academic thing. So, again, thanks to all of you for investing your time, your energies, your expertise into these conversations. Thanks to all my colleagues who've worked so hard to really make this work. This is really, truly the best part of my job, is to be able to spend the time thinking about these issues, to really have conversations and let people, display their work in new ways. So again, a real round of thanks to all of you, and let's continue. Thank you. Daniela, did you want to say anything?